functional.
Jeff, there's a seat for you right there.
What? What were you saying?
This Jeff.
Oh, this.
Oh,
Too many Jeffs in the room.
too many Jeffs.
Jeff, you can have water, please.
Yeah.
Jeff, can I have the water, please?
Oh.
Thanks.
Okay, I will start the special meeting of the Board of Selectmen to order. Today is the October 11th at 7 p.m. Can we have the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so we've had some developments very recently, and I'd like to let everybody know that, give you this statement. The town's decision to pursue an application to provide ambulance service for the Southbury Training School was premised upon the State of Connecticut Department of Developmental Services providing its support for our application and understanding that the town would be provided at no charge or at a nominal charge the ambulance equipment and use of the facilities at Southbury Training School. On this basis, we began to negotiate EMS and fire protection services. We began extensive discussions and drafting of a memorandum of agreement for the transition of EMS and fire services. The plan was laid out so that the transition of services would be done in an orderly manner to protect the level of service to a vulnerable population. Our application, filed with the State of Connecticut Department of Public Health to provide ambulance services at STS, were premised on these understandings. As the process advanced, the Department of Developmental Services position began to change. Yesterday, I was informed that for reasons not fully explained, the state is not willing to follow through on these understandings, and it will not sign the memo of agreement document or enter into an agreement with the town. As such, it is my recommendation that the town of Southbury withdraw our application with the Department of Public Health if by the close of business on Monday, they do not change their position. This means that the Danbury ambulance application is next in line and will be heard the week following and may be well approved. So we are, they're not willing to go along with the memo of agreement. So Jeff Tinley's here to explain and any questions about this.
Okay. Well, I think what Jeff Manville read was fairly self-explanatory.
Need a microphone.
Okay. Thank you.
Put in the budget for another one.
As I said, I think what Jeff Manville just explained is fairly self-explanatory. The basis upon which we were proceeding assumed certain things. It would completely change the way we analyze the situation if the state is not providing that kind of support, and that's the basis for the decision that was made. And you know, if there's still ongoing discussions, if things change, then our position may well change. But that's where we stand.
So we were going into this with what the state wanted was for us to looking for us to take over the fire and ambulance somehow so that they can get out of the extensive overtime that exists. So we came up with a plan for this, and now they're backing out of the plan. It doesn't make sense for us to move ahead the way without that. It just doesn't make sense.
Jeff, sorry.
Jeff Tinley.
Specifically, what does the Danbury ambulances application apply for?
The Danbury ambulance application, which I had, but I gave to someone to copy. It applies for what's called an extension of service. So it's an application a form, which is a need for new or expanded EMS services. And so it is, if you look through it and you look through our application, you'll notice it's virtually identical. It's very similar, with the exception that because they all are already licensed and they provide services in other areas, their application is for an extension of their service, whereas our application is for a new service.
Our application was, actually said extension of services. It didn't have new on there, which was some of Southbury Ambulance's problem with it. But
Our application, I'm sorry?
our application was also for an expansion of existing service.
There's a form that the Department of Public Health prescribes to be used, which is a need for service form, which we filled out.
I believe our application, though, for the town said, need for new and expanded EMS services.
It's, well, the form applies to both, new and expanded. So, but,
Well, in our application, it was only checked off expansion of existing services. That's all I'm saying.
okay.
Okay? Is that correct? Is that what you guys understood too? I'm just concerned because I haven't seen this before, and I hear what Jeff's saying. Well, imagine that, the state reneged on what it said it would do for us. I am uncomfortable voting to withdraw the application without knowing the ramifications of having Danbury ambulances be the next in line.
Right.
I don't feel that we as a board have gotten our answers, or our questions answered, and I feel like, shame on us. So we need to, I'm still uncomfortable, and I'm just throwing that out there, because I don't know that this application from Danbury only applies for the BLS service for the Southbury Training School, because it mentions ambulances and transport and so forth, so I just need a little clarity on what it says.
And I actually, for clarification, these are not applying for the same thing. Unless I'm reading it wrong. The town of Southbury application, which Selectman Naylor is correct, it is on the same, the geographic areas to be served and implementing the proposed service, on our form says ambulance, geographical boundaries of Southbury Training School. ALS non-transport boundaries of the town of Southbury. That is different than the geographic areas to be served and implemented the proposed service that's on Danbury Ambulance's form. And last time, there was conflicting information given to the board last time we were together. And I still don't have clarity on what those differences are. My understanding is that according to this, we were applying for both BLS service within the geographical boundaries of the training school and ALS non-transport service within the boundaries of the town. There was some clarification given that we would correct it to just make it within the.
And there's a letter that was sent out.
So these aren't the same application. We're not applying for the same thing. Can you clarify that for me?
Sorry, don't mean to put you on the spot.
Yeah,
I can
well,
make a decision with.
it's the same in the sense of applying to provide services within the boundaries of the Southbury Training School, which is the area that the state had indicated it wished to have us take over. The ALS service we are currently providing, as you know, through a contract with Campion Ambulance for the entire town. And although that ALS service is not covered by a PSA that's been issued, so our application addressed that as well, to say that we would have the PSA to do that. So if Danbury was approved, their application was approved, and they were awarded the rights to the expansion of their service within the geographical boundaries of the Southwood Training School, does the PSA still sit empty on the other realm, as it has been? What's the risk there of it sitting empty? Does SAA have intentions of applying for that? There's still a dearth of information that we just don't have. And I think from last meeting, nothing's changed really in our mind,
except for this information that wasn't public to the town before, that this was a piece of a much bigger initiative and plan. So I still am not clear on the financial ramifications, on the public health and safety ramifications of Danbury getting in line next. They could be rejected, they could be approved. What are our alternatives? Could we make a recommendation? It was discussed last time when Ms. Hoyt was talking on behalf of SAA about do we make a recommendation on behalf of the town that we're endorsing someone else's application? What are our options?
Those are options, yes. And in terms of what it would mean if Danbury's application were to be approved, my understanding is that the Danbury ambulance would then station an ambulance, and it might be a advanced life support ambulance in Southbury. They would like to do it according to their application at the training school site as well. They would need the state of Connecticut's DDS approval to do that. And they've asked for a total of 3 additional ambulances. So the immediate effect would be that there would be more ambulances available to cover Southbury, and they would have a paramedic, as I understand it, within the town.
And
So
in
there would be more available ambulance services to cover the calls in the town.
Thank you, Jeff. And in theory, that sounds, obviously, more ambulances, better opportunity to get where they need to get quicker. But we had some clarified information from the last meeting, and I would like to recognize, if he's okay with it, Arthur O'Neill. And the reason I would like to do that is because he mentioned something that he discovered, that you can't have an ALS certification without a BLS certification. So if we now withdraw our application for full-town ALS and partial BLS for Southbury Training School, do we take ourselves out of the running to get that ALS eventually? I'd like to know if Arthur got some answers to that question, unless you know the answer.
I think it's correct that if you don't have the basic transport license, you can't have the advanced life support license.
So that would mean that it would be, should it get assigned by the state later, it would be a battle among those who are currently providing BLS services.
I think we have to keep in mind that the ALS services that we provide cost the town $260,000 a year. So I don't.
Offset by the payment from the ambulance companies.
Partially offset.
Partially offset,
It's
so
a
it's
very
not.
significant net cost to the town, so I don't anticipate there'd be a great battle to take over that spot. The reason that there's interest in the Southbury Training School area is because along with that comes the ability to have a presence in town, to do transports depending on where you are in line to get the calls, and to do non-emergency transports with patients from nursing homes and other facilities where you can get reimbursed either by private payers or by insurance. And so for someone who's in the business, although they may not make money and may actually lose money on providing basic life support transports at Southbury Training School, it fits a business model where they can overall make money by expanding their scope of their business.
But it also may limit the business model for the folks who currently provide the services in the town, is my concern.
Well,
We're giving an opportunity to another outside company over our own local folks who have provided good service. That is some of my reservation. I'm throwing that out there. But I still would like to hear from Arthur in case he has any new information from the last meeting, if anybody else does too.
So if Jeff will still be here, but is there, while Jeff is here, sitting here, is there any other questions? As I stated in the beginning, was what I want to say is this: we were looking to be first in the door with the application so that the town could control this and how it works. The model that without being the state providing the equipment, which is what we asked for, and which was what we were working towards from the very beginning, getting the equipment at the training school and the place there is not going to happen now. So that model of providing for this and doing it is not financially feasible.
Because we would have to, based on the education from the costs for the equipment that was outlined in there, the assumption was that that equipment.
The startup
would be
costs would have been,
handed off
we would have been able to move in
Yep.
up and operate very quickly and make that transition. And that was what we were looking towards doing, and then making sure that this falls out the right way. But now it's just, it's with the lack of support and with the state no longer willing, for whatever reason this week, not to be into, we were supposed to have that agreement in place on its way. They have decided they do not want to enter, whether it's political whims in Hartford, I don't know. We have no idea, but it's not going to work financially.
I would agree with withdrawing the application because of the reasons Jeff was explaining. We don't want to be buying ambulances, and if we can't get the ambulances at the $1 rate that the state was originally offering, it makes no sense for us to sit on.
Yeah.
No, it's working now. It makes no sense for us to get that or push that application forward because it's just going to cost us a lot of money, and I don't think I would support that.
For the record, people have been saying that it can't be done. Well, the fact is, when the town took over the dispatch, there was a big issue, and we needed equipment and whatnot. The state did buy equipment and transfer it to the town. And I also want to be clear that the town of Southbury has provided a fire truck to the state of Connecticut Training School and air packs for their fire department to them. So it's not like Southbury hasn't done things for the state. Another thing we have discovered and we want to look into is that, and I hope Arthur O'Neill will help us look into this up at the Capitol, is we have discovered that we have been providing paramedic service under our contract with Campion Ambulance, and we have not been reimbursed for anything from the state for those services, and we're going to have to look into whether we should have been or why we were not reimbursed for those calls. So we have been a player with the state of Connecticut. We have helped the state of Connecticut over there, and we've been partners with them. So to say that that it would be illegal to give, there's also a land deal for senior housing that's in there that is a lease for a dollar or whatever for senior housing. So it's been done.
I don't recall anyone here talking about anything being illegal.
I'm just saying,
At all, so I just-
it's been said that it's in,
Wasn't said at our last meeting.
not
it
here,
wasn't
not
said
here at this board, but it can be done.
Arthur, do you want to, I know Jennifer
Any-
asked if you had any more
Arthur?
information to share.
Handouts?
Yeah.
So, you know.
So, you
Arthur, I
all,
just want to say one thing before you start. There's been an update that you are not aware of, right? So,
Okay,
can you read
so
it?
I'll read this back again, you were
It's
here
important for you to know
on the
this.
beginning. The town's decision to pursue an application to provide ambulance service for Southbury Training School was premised upon the state of Connecticut Department of Developmental Services providing its support for our application and an understanding that the town would provide at no charge or at nominal charge, would be provided at no charge or nominal charge the ambulance equipment and use the facilities of the Southbury Training School. On this basis, we began to negotiate EMS and fire protection services. We began extensive discussions and drafting of a memorandum of agreement for the transition of EMS and fire services. The plan was laid out so that the transition of services would be done in an orderly manner to protect the level of service to a vulnerable population. Our application filed with the State of Connecticut Department of Public Health to provide the ambulance services at STS was premised on these understandings. As the process advanced, the Department of Developmental Service position began to change. Yesterday, I was informed that for reasons not fully explained, the state is not willing to follow through on these understandings, and it will not sign the memo of agreement document or enter into an agreement with the town. As such, it is my recommendation that the town of Southbury withdraw our application with the Department of Public Health if by the close of business on Monday they have not changed their position. This means that Danbury ambulance application is next in line, will be heard the following week from ours, and may well be approved. So they are not supporting what their agreement we had worked on to take over the emergency services at the training school with the fire and EMS. So due to lack of support by the state, basically with the equipment, the model does not work, and it's not, I don't believe, in the best interest of the town to pursue it.
Okay. That's obviously changes a lot of the conversation that we've had last week and the information that I gathered this week. I have given you a copy of the answers to the first round of questions as I understood them from the last meeting. I try to capture from my recollection and some notes I took what you folks wanted, and I'm hoping that those answers were sufficient. No, a couple of people got back to me indicating that they had some additional questions, but no, I don't know that there was any problem with the questions as phrased, or they were the wrong questions, or anything. Okay, good. The second, so based on that response to that first round of questions, some of you asked additional questions, raised issues, which I then presented to DPH. Late this afternoon, I got the answers to those questions. The first one is, if the application is granted, can the town subsequently relinquish the PSA? And you've got the answer right now, or in front of you. I'm not going to try to summarize it other than to say that it sounds like they're not really directly answering the question, but I guess it depends on whether the PSA is ever actually assigned in the first place. That's sort of a hypothetical question, since there, in fact, is no PSA available to be assigned, because Southbury Training School has never announced that it is relinquishing the PSA that it currently holds. And when I say to Southbury Training School, I mean DDS or whoever the proper legal entity is. The second question is, if the town says it's going to provide service at a certain level and then, in fact, contracts it out, again, they haven't reviewed that application yet. And so they're really not answering that question clearly either, other than to say that what's really pending is the effort by the police department to become essentially a provider, to be recognized as a provider, so that it could at some point apply for a PSA, should a PSA become available. And then the last question is really, can the town withdraw, or rather can obtain a continuance without withdrawing the application? And there was a real punt on this one on the part of the person that I deal with, saying that's a legal department question. So I was hoping for better answers, but given the time constraints, this was the best that I could do to try to answer these questions. It sounds like they are rather hypothetical to begin with, because what they're currently considering is a different application than I think seemed to be pending, which was the assignment of the PSA. They're saying that there is no PSA, and that while there's an application, that can't happen until the hearing on the police department being recognized as a provider were to be held and granted.
So based on that, if I could just ask Jeff Tinley, what exactly is scheduled next Thursday? Like what is the topic of the hearing that is scheduled for next Thursday?
17.
It's a hearing on our application.
Which
Well, what we expected and anticipated was that by now, we would have had the state Department of Developmental Services saying they were relinquishing their PSA, and that we would be applying to take that over. This is a process, as you know, that's been in the works for months, and we've had this MOA circulating and waiting for a signature, waiting for the green light from the state to go forward. And we filed our application anticipating that it would in fact be a relinquishment. They made it clear they want someone to take over this service. And they made it clear, we thought, to us that they would cooperate with the town as it made sense for everyone concerned for that to happen. But that has changed. So
what is, so they haven't relinquished their PSA, and let's say they don't before next Thursday. What is scheduled for next Thursday?
Well, according to what Arthur just read, if there wasn't a relinquishment of the PSA, it would just be to establish that the town of Southbury Police Department was a qualified provider, so that we could then seek to take over or acquire a PSA in the future. But bearing in mind that as of today, when we met with representative of DES, they were unaware, it seemed, of the need for them to say they would relinquish the PSA as a necessary, one might say, initial step in this process. They thought, well, and the process we followed has been what DPH had told us to do. They gave us the form to fill out. They assisted us in how to fill it out. They even told us that it should be the Southbury Police Department as the applicant. So we're following the process that they laid out for us. And what we understood the Department of Developmental Services would support, and that they would relinquish their PSA to us. But if you're confused, it's not surprising, because everyone we're dealing with seems to be confused as well.
Including up at DPH and DDS.
Keep in mind, this is not an everyday occurrence. And by that I mean particularly when we're talking about an area of service where the service is being provided by the state or state agency. It's very rare, and then the transfer of that or transition of that is something that I don't think anybody involved in this process has really been involved with before.
And there are actually statute that shows, and it talks about transferring percentages and pieces and how much and what you have to prove. And it's let me tell you about, for the record, we called the state for Danbury Ambulance's application to see it. How many times? 2, 3 times? We called them 3 times, requesting to see the application. We sent an email once or twice to see the application, have it sent to us. We FOI'd finally, said we're gonna FOI this application from Danbury. Finally, because we needed to see this application that Danbury Ambulance was putting in, we called Danbury Ambulance, and Mr. DeSimone very quickly faxed the application over to us without a problem. I could not get it from the state of Connecticut.
Almost
But I
as
got
long
it
as,
from
almost as long as it took some of us to get our own application from Town Hall, by the way, just to be clear. One question I have, and I've been confused about this all along. If it says right here, and I start it, that last paragraph of question 1, your answer to question 1, that if a PSA is unassigned, the decision to assign a PSAR lies within the authority of OAMS, and it does not go to a hearing. The application submitted by Southbury Police Department cannot be considered until a decision is rendered regarding the need for service to see if they will be granted certification and licensure. According to that, next week's meeting would be canceled, unless something changes before next Thursday. Correct? I haven't seen the questions. Yeah, at this time, the training school has not formally relinquished their PSA, so technically there isn't an unassigned PSA that exists, meaning that Danbury Ambulance can't apply for it, we can't apply for it, SAA can't apply for it,
Right.
nobody can apply for it because it doesn't exist to be applied for right now. That's at least how I read that.
That's what I'm reading.
Okay.
And then if we can't apply for that, then we can't apply for the other one that we've applied for because we need to have the
Correct.
BLS in order to
Right.
apply for the ALS, right? So,
And without the state,
so we asked for a continuance, the hearing? Did that happen?
well, at this point, the model which we were
Financial
applying
model would
for doesn't exist. So
So for
you
clarity,
don't, you
yeah.
can't really go to a hearing with a model that doesn't exist, that doesn't,
well, we could ask for a continuance, and
and my understanding is that unless the other ambulance, the other applicant,
they would continue. That's what Arthur said.
you would have to get them all to agree, and if they don't agree, they still need to look at it, it's a scheduled hearing.
Yeah, but they can't, we're talking about procedure now, not sort of like, whether or not we're going to withdraw yet. But as to that, though, if it's a fact that STS hasn't relinquished their PSA and nobody could apply for it, then
That
it
was
doesn't
part of,
matter if nobody
Right.
agrees to continue it. Like if they can't assign it, they can't assign it. They can't
Danbury
proceed.
Ambulance is applying for an extension of service.
Just for the
We're
BLS.
actually looking for the PSA and saying, okay, we're gonna do the same thing we've been doing, but in a bigger area is what whatever it is.
Jeff,
I don't
can
think
you,
they need the PSA.
can you speak to that expansion of,
I think that's right. But again, the system that's been set up is very difficult to comprehend.
Jeff, to your comment earlier about the nobody wanting the PSA for ALS because it costs money, does that mean that we can continue doing what we've been doing through Campion or whoever we decide to give a contract to provide that ALS to the town?
Yes.
The fact that Danbury Ambulance is bringing, or they're talking about bringing a paramedic into STS territory, does that help us in any way? Is that going to reduce our costs or provide better service to the town?
I think it could do both. There's a lot of details that we don't know, but certainly having if you look on Google and say, what's the distance between Campion and where we're sitting right now, it takes about 22 to 25 minutes to get here. We're looking for response times substantially less than that. So as a practical matter, we have the theoretical fly car where they meet somewhere. But in practice, I'm not sure how often that happens or how that really works. So if we have a paramedic here in town, I think it's fair to say we'd have faster response time for ALS service.
I think that makes sense. I mean, an embedded paramedic would be preferable in my view, although I'm no expert. I do believe,
excuse me, this is a board meeting.
We don't need the town lawyer talking about it.
Excuse me, sir, this is a board meeting, not a public meeting. Continue, George.
I forgot what I was going to say now. I'll defer at this point.
I would, shoot. I would like clarity on what Southbury Ambulance applied for. I believe it was twofold.
We invite Geraldine up to.
Geraldine, I'd like to hear from you, please. Hi. Good evening. So, SAA applied for ALS services from 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, is that correct? That was your proposal to us.
That was your proposal, yes.
What applications have you physically submitted to the state?
We have an application sitting at the state right now for a paramedic 24/7 stationed at Southbury Ambulance
In town?
in town.
When was that filed?
the week after yours was filed.
Is that an application for the PSA?
No, it's not.
Okay.
So is that an expansion of service?
It is. So as we presented, it was the crawl, walk, run. Okay, because of 3 PSAs in town, it's impossible to cover 3 PSAs, singly, meeting the first 911 request without it being a loser. So when we talk about getting 50% of the monies, I mean, we're paying Campions for being ready. That's part of what you're paying for. So,
I'm sorry you have to
what's-
keep
what's the
educating
difference?
us, but
that's okay, that's
So
okay.
what's
I
the
wish that we could have done this 9 months ago.
So what's the difference between applying for an expansion of service with a 24/7 paramedic in town and applying for the unassigned ALS PSA for the town?
Southbury Ambulance is an existing service. The town of Southbury is not. The town of Southbury police
So you can
officers,
provide that without having the PSA? Is that,
the paramedic,
yeah,
yes,
okay.
if the state grants me permission.
What does that do to
And
the-
when I came before this board, it was months and months after I had went to Jeffrey, and I would have thought that Southbury Ambulance would have been, our intention was to looking out in the best interest of the town and the townspeople after all the conversations during the medic conversations, when the paramedic contract was up. And there was a handful of people that were here with concerns. This board was going to look, survey and see if an embedded medic needed to be here or not. I did ask the question, what were the results of the survey, and I was told, Geraldine, that's none of your business. Well, I'm a stakeholder here. I mean, we provide a tremendous service to the town and its people. So, we thought we were doing the right thing by saying, okay, well, let's start building this. Let's bring a medic in a little bit at a time, and I'm going to say within 3 years, Southbury Ambulance can handle the R5 in the town of Southbury. And don't you find it suspicious that nobody is looking and fighting for this R5, for the R5 PSAs?
So if your application to extend service for one 24/7 paramedic embedded,
That right now, yes.
that's what you're.
Yes.
What does, if that's granted, and you have one 24/7 paramedic, what does that do to the necessity of the Campion contract as it currently exists?
Well, the Campion contract has to be maintained because I will not be the owner of the PSA. This is a supplement. So the model that we followed was New Milford's, of which, we're not being allowed to follow the New Milford plan on what they got approved on, probably because of all this other stuff that's going on. Everybody up at DPH is, I guess their heads are spinning. They can't think. They don't know. They can't act on anything, so they're doing nothing. So what that will do is put a Medicare at every shift that we can have one here. What we wanted to do was have a Medicare Monday through Friday, 9 to 5, and they won't accept that. So I have to go with the 24/7.
And the cost of that to the town?
0.
But
The startup cost to Southbury Ambulance is about $80,000.
Does that assist in any way with lowering the cost of the Campion contract?
Right now, it cannot, because we're only considered to be supplemental. As the program gets into it, so the intention was to evaluate it in like 90-day increments and decide when to bump it up to the next level, and then when it can be guaranteed. Now remember, You know, one medic isn't going to be able to cover Southbury Training School PSA, Heritage PSA, and Southbury Ambulance's PSA. This is, you know, any calls that Southbury Ambulance goes on. So there'll be one medic that will be going on, hopefully, ALS calls. But it may have to go on BLS calls. Because it's going to be part of a crew. It's not going to be a fly car. It's going to be my 2 people that start at 6 a.m. One of those people is going to be a medic.
So with doing that, would it then be that the town could go out to look for a contract for backup paramedic alone? Backup paramedic to this system instead of a guaranteed fly car first response?
After her business grows. After
That
your
way
model
there's a
takes
backup
off.
paramedic. There's a backup paramedic available to that instead of the primary paramedic.
Right. But you still, we still have the, the obligation of Heritage Village and Southbury Training School. And that's another beauty of having that Southbury Training School. You know, when that PSA, when the state decides to give their 60 days notice to the state of Connecticut to relinquish their PSA, you know, that's another reason for that PSA to be reverted back to Southbury Ambulance, because now we only have 2 PSAs to worry about. We don't have 3 PSAs to worry about for having 3 first responses to that 911 call. And that applies to the paramedic, part as well, when you own the R5 medic.
Could you explain what the
R5 is paramedic. The R5 PSA is for the paramedic, which is part of your application.
ERs for region?
Yes.
So right now, as I think I understand it, our application is for the BLS part of STS. Because the BSA is not available to us, because they have not withdrawn it.
No, our application,
No, I know
It's
what
for
it
both.
says, but in terms of the hearing, when they actually vote on it, they can't give us the ALS part of things because they haven't relinquished it yet. So therefore, the only part of our application that's
No, they don't have
acceptable.
an ALS.
I have a letter from Ralph Kohler, the director of OEMS, that plainly says Southbury Training School has not filed to relinquish their PSA. So
For
the
which
town of
part?
Southbury's,
That's the confusion, I think. is
Southbury
which-
Training School has one PSA, BLS.
Okay,
Okay, nobody owns the R5 PSA,
which is the paramedic.
which is the paramedic.
Okay.
Okay?
been
So
unassigned.
there is no PSAs to be going after, okay?
how long has the paramedic PSA been unassigned?
Forever.
It was never
It
assigned.
was
And as
never
long as
assigned.
it's being covered, it doesn't ever
Does it
have to be
exist?
owned.
Does it exist, or is it,
Yes.
does it exist only in theory?
No,
we
they
provide the
exist.
service.
There's
Right, we
three,
provide the service, but it's
Right.
an unassigned PSA.
right, there's 3 unassigned PSAs for R5.
And I don't know, Jeff, if you know this, you might know it. Is that abnormal in the state in other regions, or are there lots of unassigned PSAs where it's being provided under contract through the town, through some other, where the service would, that normally would be covered as being
It's
provided?
common.
Okay.
Okay, so then our application is technically for the R5 PSA and not the BLS because the BLS is not available to
No.
us.
No.
Well,
The
you could look at it that way.
MOA was
Well-
that they would relinquish that PSA for the BLS in transition with their equipment to take the equipment and run it.
So this was a presumptive application based on 2 separate but related situations.
Including the transport
Right,
license.
right, which was
is
separate
the
related.
third.
We put in our application prematurely because there is nothing to be assigned.
It could be assigned.
It hasn't been relinquished.
Well, the BLS hasn't been
The
relinquished.
BLS has
Right.
not been relinquished. That was the agreement of the transition. The ALS is not assigned.
unassigned.
And could be assigned.
But we can't afford it.
Right.
But
Even
the
though it
bottom line
hasn't
is,
been
without
for
this-
history.
The 60-day notice has to be 60 days prior to the sale or transfer. So the sale or transfer wouldn't occur until we or going into providing the service, which could be 6 months down the road. So it could happen that, and we believe that the state was going to do this, but they haven't as of yet.
That's not my understanding of 19A 181F.
Well, sometimes I think up at DPH, they don't always understand themselves.
Right.
What's the statute?
He's saying it's G.
19A-181G, a primary service area responder as defined in 19A-175 shall notify the Department of Public Health and the chief elected official or the chief executive officer of the municipality to which it is assigned not later than 60 days prior to the sale or transfer of more than 50% of its ownership, interests, or assets. It goes on to say any person who intends to take it over has to file an application to do so. So there's the two parts, is the holder giving the 60-day notice prior to the sale or transfer, and then the transferee filing the application to do the transfer.
Jill?
So does that notice exist? The state has never written that, so there is no notice.
I have a question. This goes back to what I was talking about before. It seems to me that as towns grow and become more sophisticated and bigger and spend more money, they gravitate toward the embedded paramedic model. And the fly car model tends to be not what they use. I mean, that's my understanding. I could be wrong. But is that your understanding, Geraldine, as well, that the embedded paramedic is the way that people go as they mature in this practice?
Personally, I think we like the fly car better, because if there's a call and the medic is not needed, that medic can free himself up and move on to another call. So more people can be assisted. It's a more expensive model.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Right, because now you have a vehicle and you have somebody 24/7 in that vehicle available on top of your 2 EMTs and your ambulances.
Yeah, either they work for the town directly, like a fire person,
Right.
or they get hired through another service. But I get back to the question of geography. I mean, Jeff Tinley was talking about that earlier, and I mean, just logically, you would think a paramedic closer to the action would get there faster, but maybe that's not really the case.
Logistics would say yes, that makes sense. And again, that's why, I mean, you know, we listened to this a year ago or 9 months ago. We listened to the people that were sitting in the room concerned about not having an embedded paramedic, and you know, made forward steps to bring one on to Southbury Ambulance, and to eventually probably would apply for the R5 PSAs and take the responsibility. But it's not feasible. It's not feasible as a first step. I said a week ago, if you do 100 ALS calls and you know you got enough money to cover 50% of that cost, and you do 100 ALS calls under any other system, the money isn't going to be any different. So that's one of the reasons why nobody's running and jumping after this R5, these R5 PSAs. And I did the simple math last week. You know, pay a medic $30 an hour, 24/7. It's going to cost more than what we have right now with 3 medics coming to town. Is it the perfect system? Is there such a thing as a perfect system? You know, my medic is going to be right here at 68 Georges Hill Road, and it's going to go to the first call, and then somebody's going to be upset because that medic wasn't available to the second call. They're going to have to get the backup medic. Well, that's growth. I mean, you try for perfection, but...
So Danbury Ambulance has an application that talks about also having a paramedic over at the training school. So if you were to do this 24/7 paramedic, and Danbury Ambulance also had a paramedic at the training school, that would be a better situation for the town?
I read that application that they applied for the BLS and the non-emergency transport. I didn't read that it was the exact, it's not.
That's why I was trying to get clarity. That's why I was trying to get clarity about what this says. I just got it, so I don't know.
Well, it just came through this afternoon finally.
Right, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say that you weren't holding it. I didn't mean that at all.
I mean, it says, provide a
Like-
summary rationale for requesting this level of service.
have
So
one, thanks.
they requested 1 additional branch place of business and 3 additional ambulances, a mobile intensive care paramedic, invalid coach, number of authorized vehicles 13 and 6. That's what they currently provide. Danbury Ambulance Services is currently licensed by the state of Connecticut, wishes to extend our services to those patients in need located within the boundaries of the Southbury Training School. DAS currently works with STS Fire Services to provide non-emergent transportation to those patients in need when STS is unavailable to complete the transport. 2017, DAS completed 58 of these transports. 2018, they've already completed 61. History of working very closely with STS and residents allows them to recognize the needs. DAS will also maintain any mutual aid agreements in place. Further, will enhance the emergency responses in the surrounding communities by working with key stakeholders to ensure every call for help is answered accordingly and timely. DAS is also a current provider to the state non-emergency medical transportation service program. That was it.
I think Joe DeSimone from Danbury Ambulance is here. Can we ask him to come up and give clarification on his application on the paramedic side?
That'd be great. But don't go too
That'd be great.
And thank you for sending that over.
Yeah.
No problem, my pleasure. Thank you. My
Please
name is
sit
Joe
down,
Sonone,
please.
President of Danbury Ambulance Service. I'm here to answer any questions that I may in regards to, our application is not on file with the town of Southbury. As a courtesy, I handed it over with no reservation, but I'll be more than happy to any questions. And there's a couple things I'd like to say if I can. There's history out there with the Bethel Police Department that holds the R5 certificate or license on its own merits. So it's possible it could be done with the town of Southbury, if you choose, That's history, and you can also check with the OEMS Health Department on that. That is not a problem. Or you could talk to the selectmen with the town of Bethel. He'll be more than happy to address the issues with you, because he's the one that actually applied for it. So again, I'm sorry, I don't mean to get on a tangent, but what is your question, sir?
What is your application? What are you seeking in your
What are you applying
application?
for?
I'm applying for actually Danbury Ambulance Service is applying for the PSA, for the town, for the STS grounds only. Now, the paramedic, I think there's some misunderstanding as far as the paramedic, if I may say. We've been provided service to the training school for about 6 months or so, under the direction of Chief Baldwin. He had staff issues, in service, out of service, in service, out of service. That would happen twice a day in regards to the needs of the STS grounds. So we have done both. There was a letter sent out by Mr. Harvey. It's in my application.
Yes.
It can be well addressed. He addressed the issue with all the different organizations in town and what their direction was. Now, I did have a conversation with Mr. Harvey about 2 days ago. Mr. Harvey said he would be more than happy to work with whatever organization that would get the grounds, okay? And when we submitted our application, we put the address as the Southbury Training School. However, it was thrown back to us, or pushed back by the state by saying, hey, listen, tell me what the address is. Well, it had to be a cottage. I didn't have it. Finally got it. So I had to send it back to him. Nevertheless, that was said and done. We were asked by the Southbury Training School about 2 months ago to station an ambulance there around the clock. My answer to Mr. Baldwin, or Chief Baldwin, very simple. Hey, listen, I don't know who's going to get the PSA, but there's no guarantee. And I said, absolutely not. And they actually shut down their service. That letter will address it. So at the 23rd hour, Mr. Harvey said, hey, listen, because we were coming out of Danbury, he put a stop to it. So at that point, they had to come up with another game plan, which I wasn't privy to any information by STS. But however, because of our response times were so too long, you know, if you remember, we were at this meeting about eight or 9 months ago. We addressed the issue with an embedded paramedic, and we were going to do a research on it, and nothing ever happened.
It's a year and a half ago, but.
A year and a half ago. I apologize, but I got to tell you, I've been in the business, Danbury Ambulance Service. I'm the founder for 40 years. From day one, I did the first call. We are a paramedic provider for the state of Connecticut. We provide paramedic service. What we talk about the embedded service for the town of Newtown. Our paramedic is in-house. We provide them with a vehicle. We provide them with the state-of-the-art Life Pack 15s. We just purchased 2, one for Danbury and one for Newtown. If you would like to see their program, you're more than welcome to call the Mr. Malcolm McLaughlin. I believe he lives right here in Southbury. He will be more than happy to give any information that in order to make your decisions moving forward. But the program is very successful. I disagree in a way to put a paramedic in the ambulance, and I tell you why. Because of where your proximity is located. As you know, the history calls for 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 calls at any given time. So guess what? Somebody's gonna have to suffer. But the first paramedic in town that can go on the reason, here's the thing. We have an algorithm that the 911 dispatchers follow. If it's a stub toe, the paramedic doesn't go. If it's something serious, cardiac arrest, chest pains, fall, they go, automatic, it's done. So yes, you have time to either save your paramedic for the next call. So that's said and done. In the ambulance, I think it's a bad solution to your problems, because you know what? You may get the first paramedic, but you're not gonna get it. Or you're gonna have to wait 35, 40 minutes, or maybe however long. I think that the single-tier system works in town in a fly car.
I think
So-
if we could just come back to,
Yes, sir.
I think that's well beyond the scope of the question. You've applied, as I understand, for STS BLS service.
Correct.
PSA. Okay. The other discussions about what SAA is looking to do, or what the town needs to do with paramedic service in town and whatnot, are not relevant to your application that you currently have.
I apologize.
Okay.
I just wanted to give a little history on what we do.
As to your application, is there I think it was mentioned that your application includes a medic at the STS. Does your application include that?
No, it doesn't.
Okay.
What I refer to is how our system works with the training school, and how it has in the past is that the 911 dispatcher, through the Southbury Dispatch Center, calls the Danbury ambulance by saying, we need an ambulance because whatever the nature is. We figure, we're going to send the highest level of care to the scene, which we have. And we've transported ALS to either Waterbury or Danbury Hospital. That's what I'm referring to. Now, if we choose to do that, it's my cost, it's my dollar, and I will do that. But it's not in the application. I guess what we're looking to service the population of Southbury Training School to the highest level of care given to the residents. That's our concern.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you.
So again, in the application, there does say, it's confusing it does say paramedic. How's it? It's listed in here. Joe, did you, on E4 in your application, I'm trying to find it in here where it led to believe that it shows a paramedic. Where does it show that?
Yeah, without reviewing, I would,
It says what services are you currently authorized to provide?
Right.
And it says
Right.
mobile intensive care paramedic, invalid coach. But under what service are you requesting authorization to provide? It's an additional branch place of business and 3 additional ambulances, and that's it.
That's it, correct.
Thank you.
Right, so that's
Thank you.
the,
George Goodwin has moved up to the front of the room, so do you want to add something to this conversation?
Well, 2 things.
If you could, up to the
Yeah.
mic.
Thank you. George Goodwin, do I have to do
Yes.
that? Yeah. Remember me? A couple of pieces that seem to be overlooked in a lot of these discussions, and it goes to the intercept paramedic. A number of years ago, 10, 12, 15 years ago, what were formerly BLS ambulances were given the opportunity to, quote, upgrade to something called MICS, Mobile Intensive Care. And basically what that meant was they took some skills that had heretofore been reserved to a paramedic, and they enabled a basic ambulance to do it, assuming you added all that training, which we did, and so did Southbury. So in that eventuality, you have a call where you can do, you know, invasive procedures and so forth. They're all listed. But the fact is that that takes 10, 12 minutes to accomplish. The paramedic model we've been using here for over 20 years, that paramedic 84 cooperating is here in 12 to 14 minutes in a dedicated fly car. If everything goes according to usual plan, the base crew is just finished doing an assessment that the paramedic would have to do himself if we didn't. So ideally, he climbs on board. It is still an ALS call. Many of them are dispatched as ALS and don't turn out to be, which also goes to the flexibility of a fly car. You can cancel him and he's free to service the next call. So there's a lot of flexibility in a fly car that you don't necessarily have. That paramedics in an ambulance, it's against the law to redispatch an ambulance. So if the call turns out to not be a real ALS call, that resource is trapped on that ambulance till that call is completed. I say trapped, but you know, captured by the call. You can't stop a call once it's started, not an emergency call. So I think that careful consideration. Now, the proximity of Campion and Waterbury has been a geographical favor in our favor for many years. I mean, Danbury is what it is, and I think it's 19 miles GPS. But with 84 being clear and at night and so forth, that difference can turn into 5 or 6 minutes. Also, the thing that gets thrown out here is that an ambulance impacts what hospital you use. And that's also a canard with respect. 65% of all my calls go to Danbury now. It used to be the other way around. When we can, absent an immediate life-threatening thing, and the state law says you go to the closest hospital, period, bang.
So I'm hearing
Yes,
from two different ambulance companies here, Southbury Ambulance Association
Mhm.
and you with the Heritage Ambulance. I'm hearing, and this is what the EMS committee made up of the two ambulance companies recommending
Mhm.
a fly car. You're here saying the fly car gives flexibility, and it means that you don't have to commit that paramedic should it not be needed. Yet we have Southbury Ambulance who's saying they want to have a paramedic on the call of the ambulance. So I'm not sure if we really know from talking to the two ambulance groups which way does work. And I
Well,
also believe
with
that-
respect, Southbury has 2 crews.
Okay, you understand the confusion. I'm just,
Well,
you know, fly car in you know, and
I think Geraldine should have should clarify anything there
Yeah.
since it was
yeah,
addressed.
I'm trying
that's
to.
fine,
Yeah.
yeah,
Walk, crawl, walk, run.
yeah.
Fall, walk, run. So to start, I'm forced, I have to do this because of expenses. The fly car is a vehicle. The fly car is its own vehicle and an added expense versus having someone on the truck. So it's the beginning stage, evaluate it, you know, every 90 days and build. 3 years. 3 years, you won't have to worry about having anybody else.
Okay, so and currently we are providing the fly car, which I'm hearing from George is a good way to go.
Right.
And I know we could talk
And
about,
Denver ambulance.
we could talk about expenses here, but what we really need to talk about is public safety and what is the best model as far as that goes. And we heard a recommendation on the fly car. I also believe that, I could be wrong, but is Danbury Ambulance Station paramedics in Newtown?
Yes, we do. We have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week paramedic.
In Newtown off what exit?
They're right off of exit, Fairfield's ran, so they come back to exit 11.
Old Fairfield Hills.
I see.
Newtown
So
Hills.
you
Okay.
still have, I think this is the source of a lot of the confusion for some of us who don't understand how calls work and whatnot. So just because you have an embedded paramedic in town doesn't necessarily mean that it needs to be on the ambulance. It still can be provided by fly car service.
Yes.
And provide more flexibility.
My-
So you can still have, so you can still, like if you ended up 3 years from now with the PSA and you got your paramedic and your backup paramedic and whatnot, you might provide that service via fly car, but the fly car is here rather than, coming from somewhere else.
Correct.
Okay.
So a question, Geraldine, regarding the impact, your perception of the potential impact. If Denver Ambulance ends up, because for the BLS, for STS, they've applied for it. We are talking about, and I think there's very clear rationale for us now rescinding our application. What would the impact be on Southbury Ambulance if Danbury Ambulance is awarded that? Have you applied for that, for the Southbury Training School BLS? If not, why not? And just what would your perception be of the impact on, on the town?
Southbury Ambulance has not applied for the BLS of Southbury Training School because they haven't given notice that they're relinquishing it. There is no PSA up to apply for. And I have that in writing from Director Kohler.
So
When that PSA does come available, I most certainly will apply, and I want to apply for the state to revert it back using the carve-out rule, because it makes the most sense to minimize the number of PSAs. Less paramedic coverage to worry about. Let's get it back to one PSA. We'll still have Heritage in Southbury, but
So if we pull out our application, what is behind us is Danbury for the PSA of the BLS of STS, right?
Which
That's
has not been
But that's
relinquished.
it, that's it. There's no other application
Right.
after yours.
That is it, that's what our application says.
Terrific. So if we pull out ours and you have yours in, but yours is not really valid because they haven't withdrawn their BLS yet, there's nothing to be worried about. We revert back to exactly the way things are right now, except for the
Well, no.
application that you have before the DPH for paramedic services. Yes?
correct. And if you're worried about the Danbury ambulance one, then you need to support, you can put a letter on file with Director Kohler, saying that you support, when and if. I mean, I inquired, when and if.
But Geraldine, it's not that we're worried about Danbury ambulance. Competition is good in America, okay?
So-
Competition is
Yes,
good.
yes.
So-
We're all here under the premise of providing
So
public safety.
if,
Understood.
so let me draw this back a little bit, okay? There was a Holdsworth report that was never accepted by the previous board. It was commissioned, cost a lot of money. Had that report that was deficient or determined that there was numbers or there was insufficient data, had that previous board got that Holdsworth report finished and properly done, we would have had, we would not be where we are today.
But it wasn't, so that's completely irrelevant, and let's not
It
look
may not be
backwards.
irrelevant,
Let's
Mike,
not
but-
look backwards, let's look
But
forward.
we have
For
to look
more
at
than
what
a
got
year
us
and a
there.
half, For more than a year and a half, we've been asking for a new analysis, because 5 years ago doesn't matter.
It's basically been upheld by, in Holsworth, and by the consultant Fitch agreed with that these separation, and we're hearing here, of 3 PSAs in this area doesn't work. And there's something,
I haven't seen that analysis from Fitch.
Neither have I.
All I've seen is a letter from Fitch about the makeup of the EMS community.
Right. There was no analysis. It was an opinion.
sorry.
No, I haven't seen an opinion from Fitch on it. Did
There was
that
a
talk
letter.
about?
I'd like to hear from Danbury Ambulance about his application. Joe, did you have something to say about what's your application, the BLS, but you're also looking for expansion of services?
Jeff, our expansion is the SDS grounds. That's what we're looking for, to expand at the PSA. That's what my application says.
Okay.
Now, I would say, if you're gonna support Southbury Ambulance, and I'm gonna ask you tomorrow to support Danbury Ambulance application. And I don't, it should be a neutral, look, our application is going to move forward. Hell or high water, it's going forward. What I said to you before, and I'll say it again, I spoke to Mr. Harvey. Mr. Harvey relayed that he'd be more than happy to work with whatever organization it may be, and that they, I forgot my thought now, but he would work with whatever group in order to make it happen. So it is going to happen. And he made it very clear that they're going to shut down their ambulance anytime soon. He made it very clear.
I don't think anyone doubts that. I don't think anyone doubts that that's going to happen, but I think it's presumptive to say it's moving forward because, and my issue here is this. There have been 2 backroom deals made here for getting the rights to Southbury Training School's services. That one was based on an assumption of equipment and the state covering our costs. One is based on an existing relationship that you have covering the service where you had inside information applied prematurely just as we did for the rights to that ground when there is nothing to be granted right now. And that is troublesome to me from the state's perspective. It's troublesome for me from a fairness perspective. And it certainly puts our local nonprofit service providers who have provided service for decades to this town at a conscious and purposeful disadvantage for getting or applying for that potential right. The reason why SAA hasn't applied for it is because there's nothing to apply for. Publicly, there's nothing to apply for. Privately, behind the scenes, people are saying, hey, submit it early. We'll put you on the schedule. We'll make a decision. We'll announce we're relinquishing it the day or 2 before you meet. I mean, that's really what's happening here. And the public who's here should know that. Not that many people of the general public, I think, are here. A lot of them are involved in the EMS services. But that's what's happening here. And that's bad. That's bad for everybody. I'm sorry, that is bad for everybody. And I don't know, Jeff, if there's any legal recourse we have on that front, but this is our town. And I have no doubt that Danbury Ambulance would provide great service. I have no doubt about that. But there's an element of fairness here to volunteers in our community who have served our community, both those who live here and those who don't live here, but who serve our community through SAA and Heritage Village, that are being put at a disadvantage because inside information was traded and there was an application put in prematurely that's sort of sitting there until, am I reading this wrong?
I think that what you're saying is not correct.
Okay.
It's at least not entirely correct. I would disagree completely with the characterization of backroom deals and with the statement that our application was premature because in order for the town to acquire rights under PSA, we'd first have to be qualified.
Right.
So that's what we're asking to do, to be qualified.
That's
now,
2
as
things,
far as
though.
what the state has been doing, as you've seen, we're not comfortable with the way the state's been dealing with us. Right. But there's no question that for over a year at least, the state's DDS has been saying They want to shut down their fire and ambulance service. That's not a secret. That's not inside
I mean,
information.
I remember when Jeff had to leave the meeting.
The question
you
is,
know, 'cause they-
what's the process for that to happen? And I can tell you that the DDS was as of today wasn't clear
Right.
as to what process they should follow to do that, and whether they needed to follow the 60-day notice rule. They were going to go back and check again with their folks as to whether they did or didn't. That's where we are. It's not that
Jeff,
people
we're
are
conflating-
being
sorry.
malicious or secretive.
Yeah.
It's that there's a lot of confusion built into this process, and a lot of confusion being fed back down from the state.
That's without question, but we're also conflating two different things going on within the town of Southbury. The Southbury Police Department has applied to establish themselves as certified licensed EMS organization.
Correct.
Part one. If that doesn't happen, part two, our application for the application need for newer expanded EMS services is completely moot.
Correct.
If they are rejected, so I just want to be clear, we're conflating two different applications.
Yep.
One is an application to certify the Southbury Police Department as a certified licensed EMS organization per the information that Arthur provided to us. So thank you for that. The second part is our application need for new and expanded services, presumptive of the fact that we were going to get approved by the town for this, and presumptive of the fact that we had an agreement in theory that we were working on with the state that would cover the cost of us fulfilling that obligation as submitted in the rights. I think in a portion of it, right? Submitted a portion of it, and I think that's something that when we first started talking about this, that's something Jason asked about. Is when you read our application, it's why we all were like, wait a second, this isn't what we had ever discussed. There was this huge potential cost liability in the agreement. I think that's what Jason first brought to the table. I don't want to speak for you, although I guess I just did. Yeah.
Just reading the application, you can see that, though.
Yeah. So I don't want to conflate those
Sorry,
two
Jason.
things, because again, one thing was done with a presumption, and then we could have not applied for the second one because we didn't know we were going to get certified. We could have waited. We could have waited to relinquish. But I get the point. You want to be first in the door. First in the door is the first one reviewed. That one, I get that.
Once the state says we're relinquishing it, then they give the notice and so forth.
Right, but we had knowledge that wasn't public, as it seems, Dan Barron. Why would you apply for the Southbury Training School BLS if there has never been any publicly available? You can't FOIA it. There is no publicly available, and you should be able to speak.
So right now, there is negotiations between a corporation, a company, with an ambulance service to do this transition on another, not to do with this one at all. And those negotiations are coming public, and it is essentially a transfer of an ambulance company to this other entity. So there are negotiations that take place to make that work. And then that company has not relinquished or notified anyone that they're going to do that yet. Once it's in place, they will do that. And then it'll go through the hearing process.
Yeah, I think what happens is that someone holds the rights under a license. As the statute says, if you want to sell or transfer it, you give this notice. But it doesn't say you can't have identified the transferee that's interested, or the transferee that's interested could not have contacted you in advance, and you have something planned. It's a sale and transfer.
But is DPH required? And then I know you want to say something. Is DPH required? Is first come status the final decision factor?
No.
So, for example, is there a requirement? Right. Once the PSA is formally relinquished and formal notice is given, I assume from everything we've heard, we'll be submitting their application for it. Now, Danbury Ambulance is sitting here telling us, but that ship has sailed. We're getting it. Right? That's what I'm hearing. That's what I just want to hear. But that's what I took.
That's not what I'm saying.
So you're saying the process is moving forward?
Our process is moving forward. We're following the same process. We notified the state of Connecticut we were going to submit an application.
Right.
It was deemed complete by a different set of eyes. What I mean by that, the original person that did the town of Southbury's is no longer there. She retired. The other eyes that looked at it said, you know what? Southbury Ambulance, or Southbury Police Department's address for the training school is okay. Guess what? Danbury Ambulance's address for the training school is not okay. It's going to be brought back for clarity and put a cottage number. I've had this argument with the state of Connecticut, and I will continue to have an argument, but our application will seem complete. And it was to move forward, and it has. There were attorneys for Southbury Ambulance trying to continue this. It was denied. We have a right to be heard under the rights of the law under OAMS. Now,
But it's not,
if I may say,
go ahead.
if I may say, the letter that you have on file with the state of Connecticut, Mr. Harvey, addresses the issue that they shut down. They literally shut down of a certain day. But they said they were going to keep their options open, holding the PSA. If you read the letter, please do, understand it, that it's not a backdoor job, that it's not the way we conduct business. They reached out to us and said, hey, listen, we need help. Could you help us? You know what I said? Yes, I will. And that's how the process starts. So please don't sit here and say, I had knowledge of a backdoor.
Well, but you applied for a PSA that doesn't exist,
But you know what?
right?
Read the letter and then you make your interpretation.
This letter?
I have
This
my
one?
to the state.
The one from May?
Correct. Read it.
I've read
See what it
twice.
says at the end of the day, because they did shut down. They did shut down, and because we couldn't respond to the needs, they ended up getting volunteers to run their ambulance, because they had an obligation to the training school. So, you know, like,
I'm reading it, it doesn't say any of that.
what's that? Read the line where it says the P towards the end.
In regards to our PSA coverage, we will continue, right, in regards to our PSA coverage, we will continue to cover the PSA with a designated mutual aid partner, Danbury Ambulance, during the time that we take to determine the best course of action.
And that, you know how it was? They were out of service. They were
Yeah.
closed. They were gone.
Right,
Gone.
right, but that's still irrelevant to my, wait, but that's irrelevant to the point I'm trying to make here, which is this. They have not relinquished their PSA. They have not filed to relinquish their PSA. There is no way any other entity, without having some conversations with the chief there, with someone at DPH,
They
would
were
have
also not
knowledge of
covering
it.
their PSA.
What?
At that time, they were not covering their PSA.
Why isn't that the story?
Well, this here, it says
Let me
that.
say the last thing, and I will close my summary, is that, very simple, we're gonna move forward with our application. You know what? When the hearing officer makes the determination, yes or no, we'll have the answer.
No, but this is my question, because it's easy, that's easier said, but that doesn't satisfy, I think, our public and our constituents.
But I'm not your public. I am a service-related owner that has.
You are, but I represent the people who live in Southbury. And the public safety and the financial liability of the town of Southbury is what we are here for. And I have no doubt, like I said, I've had I've had experiences with Danbury Ambulance before. I know friends who have. I don't doubt the quality of service. That's not the question. The question I have and the issue I have is that for some reason, the town of Southbury, right, and Danbury Ambulance had magical knowledge to apply for a PSA that hasn't been relinquished because first comer status wins. And that is inherently an unjust process, isn't it? Explain to me how that, I understand how politics works, don't get me wrong.
I'm not aware of any rule that says first comer wins.
Okay, so they're not guaranteed.
One could infer
Well, the only one left.
that it may be better to be first than not to be first, but again, this is not a very well-defined process.
Right, but they're not the only one left, Jennifer, because there is no application process.
But no, again, this is a transaction that's defined by statute. What it says is you can't close on that transfer or sale unless 60 days has expired after you've given notice that you're going to relinquish it. It doesn't say the process can't start before that.
So in theory, the day that this came public, that we and Danbury Ambulance submitted for this BLS, we did for ALS, but for BLS for Southbury Training School, in theory, Southbury Ambulance should have immediately jumped in the ring in that, and I'm going to use it, in that political game.
I can't say that because, again, the process is not that well defined, and I can't say whether Danbury Ambulance is jumping the gun either. I think it's right, that's for the hearing officer to decide.
Right.
As to whether there's anything to give away or not.
But
They're entitled
Danbury, I mean,
to ask for a decision.
Danbury Ambulance filed this after Town of Southbury, right?
Correct.
Right? Did you have knowledge that the Town of Southbury had filed this application when you filed yours?
Every right, every knowledge to move forward, and, you know.
No, I'm not getting into this.
Yeah.
I'm getting at a different point. I'm not getting into this discussion of who knew what. You filed your application after Southbury. Did you know that Southbury had filed its application? Okay, so you filed yours independently and didn't know ours was pending. Okay,
It is not my understanding, when this moves forward, the owner of this PSA can come to an agreement with another entity, whether it's Danbury Ambulance, Southbury Ambulance, Town of Southbury. If the hearing officer can move it forward, tell me if I misunderstand this, moves forward, the state can determine that it's in their best interest for financial reasons to relinquish this PSA, file notice with the intent of this other entity, whatever it may be, to take it over. Is that correct?
If the state wants to relinquish it, yeah, and then they give 60 days
60
notice
days
prior
notice,
to
and
the
then-
actual transfer.
And if the hearing officer determines that this will work and they're qualified to do it, the state could then say, we're gonna relinquish this PSA in order to have this tremendous savings.
Yeah, because, I mean, the state still has an interest in who provides the service there, because they have responsibility for the residents at that location.
If the state is shutting down their ambulance service at SDS, which apparently they already have, why would what logic would there be for them to retain the PSA?
They shut it down for a period of time, and then when it was determined that the response time, because the service was coming from Danbury, were too long, they started up again.
But they're going to shut it down eventually.
And that's been public knowledge for quite some time. It's been no secret that they have wanted for a long time to get out of the obligation to provide ambulance and fire service at that facility.
So that's not been hidden. The state has talked about this.
No.
This letter is dated May 24th. It went out to Southbury Ambulance, Heritage Ambulance, Roxbury Ambulance, Canterbury,
Correct.
and Danbury. So if I'm an ambulance person reading this letter, I'm saying to myself, that's probably a PSA that's coming up.
But it specifically states we will continue to cover it.
Right, but.
Because they,
Right,
But the writing's on the wall.
But-
The writing was on it.
But yeah, the writing's on the wall, but my understanding, and I'm not sure if this is correct, maybe Arthur knows more, that a request for this type of assignment is done by an application process when a PSA is available. A PSA is not available. So this is essentially, you get in line hoping that a PSA becomes available. So,
What Jeff is saying
is that it?
negotiations start ahead of the PSA being relinquished, and that makes sense to me. I get what he's saying.
Why wouldn't there be a negotiation then with other players? There were two negotiations
but
going on, clearly.
that's the state's determination, who they would want to talk to and who they want to, what they want to do is have somebody responsible to provide the service that they no longer want to
Right, but they
provide.
can't,
And
right, financially, I get
how
that.
they do it, I can't tell you that I think the way they're doing this is particularly good, but it's the way they did it. We're not
Again,
happy with the way
what I
was handled.
hearing is, so let's put it out on the table. Campion Ambulance is being bought out. There's no secret. Campion Ambulance is being bought out, and it's in negotiations. Their PSA is not released yet. A hearing will be scheduled, okay, with the Trinity Health. So they're not, how can they be having a hearing if they're not willing to transfer that? So they're going to do this, get it through the hearing, make the notification, 60 days, and it transfers. So my understanding is the 60 days, we explained the 60, it's not that you have to wait for that PSA to be open before you do the negotiations.
Correct. The 60 days is so that notice would be given to parties who may have an interest, parties who may want to state a position or intervene, and then there's a hearing conducted to determine whether the proposed transferee is qualified and can provide the services. But there's nothing that says in the statutes or regulations that I'm aware of what order this proceeds in.
Joe?
I believe I can have two things and then I'll jump. One, if Southbury Training School could not provide the service anymore, they would notify the state of Connecticut. They would notify the town of Southbury, hey, we can't cover anymore, okay? We need to get something. And what the state will do, the health department, they will actually have somebody assigned to the premises to cover the calls. That's number one. And number two, as far as camping ambulance being sold, that was been on the market for a long time. However, twofold. Because I'm a commercial company, I want sold companies. If I sell them to another entity, another commercial entity, there is no public hearing. It's just, I'm going to buy your company, I'm buying their assets, it's done. Because they're a healthcare, it's a different animal. So, I mean, if I were to buy campus tomorrow, I would just take over the PSA and it's done.
Yeah, I mean, the state of Connecticut can't just give 60 days notice we're not going to provide service anymore. They have a responsibility there. And if they haven't identified who's going to take it over, how could they be giving 60-day notices that they're going to stop?
Geraldine, you raising?
Prior administration, Southbury Training School came to Ed Edelson on numerous occasions in 1 year to say, Friday's it. Ed Edelson got a hold of Chief Baldwin, Geraldine Hoyt, sat in the room, can you cover this? Yes. That was that. On Monday, everything was back normal. This is not the first time this has happened. This has been going on for several years. They closed or not. Southbury Training School ambulance reduced their ALS status to BLS. That enables Southbury ambulance to cover them all the time. After Joe, because of your response times, and they change things.
Right.
And every time they call and say they don't have people, we're over there covering. So let's say worst case scenario, Jeff gets a phone call 10 o'clock tonight and says, that's it, we're done. You write out a mutual aid agreement that we cover until the state can rectify this problem.
Right.
So you bring in your mutual aid services. So everybody in this area would be part of the system. It's built in. It's a built-in thing.
Yeah,
It's something that we do every day. When this town is 7 and 8 deep, okay, and all my ambulances are out, all George's ambulances are out, the training school ambulance is out, we're bringing in Oxford, we're bringing in Danbury, we're bringing in Champions. This is an everyday thing.
Right. And I think we all understand that, and that's great, but I think the unusual aspect here is that the current provider is the state of Connecticut. If a private company says, we're out of money, we can't do this anymore, that happens, and then people cover. But for the state to walk away without having a plan for transition is, one might say, irresponsible. So they have to get it lined up before they say it's over. I mean, they could say on a given day, because of the budget or whatever, we don't have anybody, and then you have to cover. But for them to just say, we're walking away in 60 days, it's the state of Connecticut. Where are they going to go? They have an obligation. They have an obligation to make sure someone is going to step in.
Or it inevitably falls to us because they're within our boundaries.
Yeah.
And the concern for the patient care and a transition in order to take care of those people.
Absolutely.
And that was the intention. There was an application, there was an understanding, there was equipment, and this is in negotiating some sort of a smooth transition so that at that point in time, as I said earlier, once the town had that and we determined how it could be, we could do that because we controlled it. And it at this point, it doesn't make any sense to do. So what I'm looking for here, my recommendation, is that we pull our application because financially it just doesn't work. It doesn't work. It's not gonna make any sense. And I have a hearing coming up, and this is what this board asked for, and we had some extreme changes from what it was supposed to be, which, if we had gotten all the equipment, wouldn't have been a bad thing, and then worked towards what we need to do. It would have been in our control. We would have been able to determine. We withdraw the application, the state says we're gonna give up that PSA, and it's gonna be whoever comes in the door, or it could be determined that Danbury Ambulance is able to provide it, and the state could do that. So the intent was to protect the people that are over there at STS, to make this transition and this shutdown, which would eventually the state is. It could be, well, they say next couple of years, but it could be 5 years, it could be 10 years, it could come back. We don't really know. So my recommendation is that we withdraw the application, because it makes no sense to do it financially.
So one, I appreciate that we had this discussion both last time and this time. Two, the question I have, and I'm turning to Councilor Bucksmouth, and Jeff's here too. There was no action required by the board, Councilor. There was no action required by the board for the town to submit the application. Is there action required by the board for the first selectman to, I mean, I appreciate you asking us and wanting that, but I don't know if formally we need to take any action other than letting you know how we feel and that we'd agree with that or disagree with it. You know, I think I would agree with it.
Well, I'm going to call for the motion because, you know, it's easy to come in here and this is one of the most complicated DPH, people retire. This is a hybrid of a situation, unusual that this, we asked today how many facilities in the state, how many state facilities actually have their own ambulance. They're not, they don't know. They don't know. Okay, I think there's what two?
Yukon and one other.
Yeah, two, like Yukon and something else, a big where you understand it, which I'm sure they're not, you know, that's almost a city within itself. So this is a very unusual situation for the state. The state is obviously in financial distress. We know that they're being pushed by OPM to come up with solutions and cost. And frankly, I was nervous about what might happen if it became a game toss and who was in, who came. This board, once we have this, and I've said this, once we have this, if we were to be assigned this and get this, we could decide our destiny because we would have controlled it, just as the state of Connecticut is controlling it right now. They're determining whether they want to give up their PSA, whether they want to let someone else come in and work off their PSA, whatever it is. And that was what I was faced with when this came in. So I need to know, I'm recommending, based on what the financial model that the getting the equipment that would get us started and get this staffing and get it so we could determine the destiny is no longer, because the state, for whatever reason, just this week, a couple of days ago, decided they are not going to do this. They are not going to be on the sign the MOA. And this all is not only, when I talk about this, it's not just the ambulance side, but this is the fire department. This is part of their fire department. This is the whole, is part of their fire department and that whole structure. So they're asking for us to take over this. They need this taken over, and we have to be, we are partner, it is within Southbury. I have people saying they can just shut down the fire department and the ambulance. I have other people who are telling me they can't shut down the fire department because they have to keep it running. Frankly, I don't really think, I don't know if they know we can or can't. So this was to guard this town. Didn't mean, and I said this from the beginning, and I think everybody here will agree, there was never any talk about taking over Southbury or Heritage Ambulance. This was about taking control of this from the state before it gets out there. They decide that they're gonna be out of this business, and we're gonna put our PSA up within 60 days, and first come, get in there, make your pitch. That's why I felt it was necessary to go after that, and I've said that.
And you wanted to get the BLS so we could get the ALS. Which has
And
been
then
on
we
the sign
seal that
forever.
up, and then we can go further. But now, with this model,
Yeah.
we can't do it. So I can't go to this hearing, I cannot go to this hearing with this model because
We don't want it.
we don't want it, and because it doesn't work at all.
So I think we can move to a motion quickly, but this entire conversation and this entire process, just to me confirms what we've talked about for a long time, the need to put out as quickly as possible an RFP searching for someone to do a comprehensive look at the financial and public safety analysis of our EMS services in town, both EMS, fire, all these issues that we have coming up that Jason, brought up a long time ago. I know we could say that 5 years ago we spent X thousand dollars doing it and nothing was done. None of us were part of that. And we have to look forward to today. What's clear is that we don't know the financial implications. We know this one's right. I think there's no question we have to walk away from this one. But this, to me, reaffirms that we don't have any information to inform smart decisions.
So let me reaffirm this.
Mhm.
We have an EMS committee that should be looking into this. That's what an EMS committee should be doing, is making these, and we should have a medical service, like a doctor or nurse, a financial person on that committee, to look at these things, to do these. This is what should have been looked at by an EMS committee all the way along.
Again, we're
Hold
conflating.
on.
we're
Our
conflating
EMS committee
issues.
did not get us to this point.
Right.
Our EMS committee was not involved in the decision to make this application. While this has been a very enlightening experience, these last two meetings, with all the acronyms and education of EMS services, I'm still overwhelmed by what knowledge I have yet to learn. So, yes, we need to address the makeup of the EMS committee. But for right now, we have applied for an application to get into the ambulance business without involving those that are in the business in our town. And that has been my gripe since the get-go. It is. It has, and it will continue to be, even if we decide to pull out right now. We have to bring everybody to the table. This has been very, very helpful.
We should have done this a year and a half.
And we will not, well, once those applications are in and there's a hearing, and it will be looked at by a hearing officer.
Is anyone allowed
So-
to, go ahead, Jason, sorry.
So, I mean, at this point in time, I think there is, not in this application, but there is analysis that still needs to be done. Geraldine has made certain proposals. She has an application pending. I don't know what the impact of that is. Danbury Ambulance has an application pending. We need to determine the best way to proceed as to offering the service to our municipality. I think all those questions remain unanswered. We should also determine, based on the current applications pending, whether the town wants to take a position on any of them, wants to intervene in any of them, wants to support them, oppose them. I mean, we need sort of knowledge on that. And I am a little concerned that this meeting got a little astray towards got a little into picking winners and losers and comments about various organizations, which I don't know that is beneficial to the dialogue for any of the organizations present. I think the town needs to be objective and needs to look at what's in the best interest of the community, the health, safety, and public welfare of our residents, and the best way to provide those services. So I still think we need to look at that. We should remain neutral. on anything that's pending until we are able to make informed decisions as to whether or not to support or oppose them. And then also the Geraldine's request that she came to us with, I don't know, 6 months ago or so. As to the pending application, you know, I've said all along and said last week as to the discomfort with being able to support something without certain information and whatnot, and I obviously remain there now, so of course I would support withdrawing it because of those concerns that don't have to be rehashed, and given the most recent information, it would seem that those concerns would even be heightened because the budget that was in there would be doubled, and you know, so we have those issues as well. So, thanks.
And I wanted to understand that had this memo of agreement and the startup cost of having everything in place, and you could make it work, but you could also get the time to do whatever transition or where you wanted it to go or how we wanted to do it. Without, we would retain control. But I would like Jeff to speak, Tinley to speak, to the number of companies we reached out to and what was their reaction on that.
Well, we have tried to find someone with the right background and qualifications to provide the report and analysis that the board has asked for. We had retained Fitch, which is a national organization, very well known. We've had a number of conversations with Dr. Fitch. He wrote a letter that you saw about the EMS committee composition. He has expressed reluctance to undertake the project. He hasn't refused outright, but there's reluctance, and it's not, again, clear exactly why, what kind of things there may be in terms of conflicts that they may have. Holdsworth will not come back and do this. The person who was the author of the report for Holdsworth has been retained by Southbury Ambulance. So his organization's not available. And it's hard to find an organization that has the right qualifications to do this. We can do an RFP and see what comes back.
So, I mean, my understanding is when Holdsworth was retained, the town had done an RFP. And I don't know how many responses there were to the RFP, but, you know, we ended up with Holdsworth.
Yeah, I was told something about that. I was not involved at the time, but.
Geraldine, do you know the answer to that? Was there an RFP associated with the first Holdsworth report?
I believe there was.
I thought that Holdsworth didn't respond, but the Holdsworth ended up getting the assignment anyway, is what I was told.
Okay. Thank you.
I mean, I'm not sure how many responses. What's that?
We only found one response to that RFP.
Okay,
Where's
but that doesn't
Who was the
matter.
response?
Where's the
The
RFP?
point I'm making is.
Hold on, who was the response for the RFP? It was not Holdsworth. The one responder for that RFP was not Holdsworth, but it was awarded to Holdsworth?
I mean, it appears from what I'm hearing back there is that the town does not have all the documents to make that sort of determination, but and maybe the town can continue to search for them and figure that out. So I'd be hesitant to speculate in that regard. But what I'm saying is there was an RFP done once before for these services. I mean, we may get no responses, but I mean, why not issue an RFP and see what happens?
But what
Yeah,
about
and one of the issues
crafting?
with Fitch is geography, and that impacts costs.
Yeah.
And you know, there are companies out in California, and there are companies in other parts of the country. As far as in this area, we've been looking.
What about the formation of a task force to recruit qualified people within this town who have no agenda to be part of an ambulance service or a provider to the town, but may have an expertise? Perhaps
Just sort of
look at
run
it a
the.
different.
That's what they did. I mean, I don't know that it met that criteria,
It
but
did not.
It
The
did,
one-
no, it did not.
It did not.
I know. But the last time around, there was a task force that was sort of charged with managing the report, And I think that would make sense to have a task force, but a task force with, you know, representation from folks and with subject matter expertise.
Just a thought.
We can do that. Again, I think an EMS committee should be structured properly so that they can get that information of the structure and the best way to go about it. But we can do a task force if that's the direction you want to go. We can take that up at another date.
I think we could do.
Yeah.
For our special meeting, remind folks, it's pretty specific, so.
So the specific was on this application.
So make a motion, I'd like to make a motion that we withdraw our application need for new or expanded EMS services filed by the town of Southbury. When was it filed? I don't think I had the
I
exact
had
date.
asked that, given that nothing changes with the state, Monday night. In other words, I don't want to pull this application if the state is still, comes back to the table with a memo of,
So I'd say this then on that, so I'm withdrawing that motion.
I
So-
doubt
so-
they're going to change.
So here's the question, I go back to what Selectman Bucksbaum said. If today we came in here and information had not changed, I would tell you straight out, I would have called for, I would have asked for a motion to withdraw the application regardless, because we were not provided with enough information to make an informed decision about the financial and public safety impact on the town. I don't know if anyone else would have supported that motion, but that's how I would have voted. To now ask us then to put forth a qualified withdrawal motion, I still don't have enough information to make the information. If the motion is a qualified one, I will be a no on that motion. Because again, I have no information, and you're painting us into a corner to
Not
you know, to do
painting into the corner. This is a hearing that will come up, a discussion. That does not mean that you have to, when it's going to be, like any other hearing, it's going to continue on for more information or whatever. You are not tied in to say, we approve this, you can do this, and then you can say, well, we're not going to take it. So it's not, the misconception is, and then you have Jeff, how long? 60 days?
6 months
6 months to,
implement a plan.
to start the service.
Right,
and if you
start
don't,
service.
it just goes back the way it was.
Yeah, and
So,
specifically to explain that, in terms of waiting till Monday, we had a meeting with Gene Harvey today where we raised some questions about what's the process that you're going through on your end? And he was going to go back to talk to his folks to try to get some answers to questions that we raised. So deferring is in part just a courtesy, since he's going back to do that, to let him respond.
So the primary impetus to withdrawing the application right now is the change in position of the state, okay? Based on our discussion last week, there may have been other reasons as well. So to Mike's point, perhaps we qualify it in such a way so that we withdraw the application unless the state changes their position by Monday night. And if they do change their position by Monday night, we have a special meeting Tuesday night to determine whether there are other reasons we want to consider to withdraw the application.
and I want to be clear, because there's, if they give this, my understanding, they hand you this, they say it's okay moving forward. Doesn't mean that the next morning you have to do it. And it doesn't mean that in that 6-month time period, you determine that I'm really not cut out for this, that you can't say, okay, we're not going to take it. Okay? That's,
Right, and at this point, we're just at the step of asking to be qualified to take on a PSA.
so it doesn't mean you're taking it over the next morning.
Right.
There is 6 months for the state to put that plan in place. And to take that, make that, it doesn't mean that the next morning, the next week, or the next month, you have to be there. You have a 6-month window to do that.
And there would be conditions that you'd have to satisfy, and you could always decline to satisfy the conditions.
So anytime during that 6 months, it can be said, look, we're not gonna be part of this, we're gonna back out of it.
I'm sorry, maybe they told you this, but, or maybe you've already told us this, but how soon thereafter, if they make, say we go for the application and we get it granted, then when does the PSAR decision by OEMS take place? How soon thereafter?
Do they make the decision after
Mm-hmm.
the hearing? We don't know. I think there's a time limit in the regulations. It might be 45 days or something like that, but I am anticipating they will request some briefs summarizing the evidence and the law before they make a decision, and then, but it's probably something like 45 days or more.
Thank you.
So that's why I said unless the state changes their mind by Monday night, and it gives, if that goes back to the agreement, then that application still sets in place. If that agreement is not in by Monday night with the state and they don't change their mind, then it's withdrawn.
Well, again, there are two applications that are on the table here. One is the application submitted to OEMS, forwarded to the legal department for determining the need for them to establish, for Southbury Police Department to establish themselves as a certified licensed EMS organization. Is that the hearing that's next week about whether or not they're doing, or is it the second application, completely separate but related, that is about the PSAR?
It's all of it,
It's both of them together.
everything together.
Is it feasible that they will be granted certification and not?
Because it's not made by
No.
hearing. It clearly says in Arthur's notes, the decision for the PSAR is not made at
Right.
a hearing, does not go to hearing.
Right.
If Arthur's notes are accurate,
Yeah.
and I believe that they are,
And they don't answer
So
the
it
question.
doesn't- it's
We're
not over
making
the
some
walls.
assumptions, I feel like, about if we get can the town get the PSA and then ignore the application submitted and provided or and provide in a completely different manner? They didn't really answer that question. That was the one they ducked.
but the third
That's the-
paragraph is the one I'm
that's
talking about.
DPH.
The third paragraph of question
That was my
one.
biggest concern,
Right.
that issue.
Well, again, this is the complexity and
Yeah.
the difficulty of dealing with this agency that we've been dealing with all along.
So what I certainly wouldn't be comfortable doing is providing a sort of very open-ended qualified withdrawal motion. If Selectman Bucksbaum can develop language that he's comfortable with, that is, that walks that line. That isn't just open-ended, because what I'm not comfortable doing with the information we have, if Monday you hear, you know what, we got a deal. We'll cover part of the cost of the startup of the service. I still don't have enough information, if that was the case, to confidently state that whether or not this is in the best interest of the town. I don't. So my concern of doing a sort of what I'd consider a basic qualified withdrawal would give you the right to strike that deal and then not withdraw the application. To Jason's point, if there's a way to say, if that does happen, we will reconvene, but it would have to be before Tuesday, because isn't the meeting
No,
on Tuesday?
it's Wednesday.
It's
right, the
Wednesday, okay.
17th?
Then that would make sense.
We could have a decision to withdraw the application as of the close of business on Monday if the state does not come back with a change in its position, but that the town would not proceed to appear at the hearing without an affirmative vote of the board to approve proceeding.
I would suggest that we have a special meeting of the Board of Selectmen on Monday night.
Or Tuesday.
And to have I'm sorry, I love you people so
Yeah.
much, I want to spend more
But
time
the
with you.
hearing's Wednesday, though, we said, right?
It's Wednesday.
They could come to us last minute on Tuesday even and do it.
But that's not the point.
Right.
We're giving Eugene Harvey the benefit of the day, right? Because he asked for that.
So
That's what we're accomplishing by Monday night.
Did he ask for that?
what I'm saying is, if we don't have,
Did he ask for that?
I'm saying if we don't have this agreement of this, it just does not work.
Oh, that, I don't think anyone
everyone
disagrees
agrees with that.
I think
So-
everyone's in agreement with that.
The question is, the question is, what if Gene Harvey calls you tomorrow, or signs the MOU and sends it out,
Right.
and says, now we have a deal? Well, this board may still have concerns with proceeding
Right.
with the
'Cause that's
application,
what-
given the discussion last week, where we don't need to rehash all
Because
that.
what Jennifer just said is new information. That, did Gene ask, wait a second, you said to us, Jeff, this is a dead deal, pretty much. Now, they could come back, but this is a dead deal. What you just said, and I'm not sure where that came from,
Jeff said it
is
to
that Gene said, hold on a second, let me have some more internal conversations, give me until the end of the day Monday?
We were being considerate.
He didn't say till the end of the day Monday. He said he would take the questions to people and would get back to us as soon as possible.
Okay.
So,
Yeah, it's I mean, it's nuanced, but it's different.
We've asked.
But your feeling is it's a dead deal?
I would say no. Given the political winds of Hartford and the
So, yeah. no,
Lack
so
of
Jeff,
wanting
hearing the concerns we have, Chair, what is the language you suggest for this motion?
that we would.
Or do we take no action and wait till Monday and just meet?
it's a very expensive day with Jeff Tinley.
Or do we just wait till Monday or Tuesday?
Well, Jeff, I mean, this hearing's Wednesday, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you're gonna have to prepare for this hearing, I would assume, or, I don't know.
Uh,
I don't know what's gonna happen at this hearing. I mean, does the town have witnesses?
Yeah, well, the deadline for the parties who have intervened to file pre-filed testimony and evidence is tomorrow. So I would anticipate getting all of that tomorrow, so that I could then prepare for the hearing on Wednesday.
Have we filed pre-filed testimony already?
No, the notice
that
of hearing
not?
does not require that the applicant pre-file.
So Monday night would be better, because we're going to incur legal fees after that.
Yeah, I mean, if we decide by Monday night, I'm fine with that. In terms of, you know, it is what it is, and we'll proceed if we have to, and we'll be ready to do it. But I'm not going to do anything between now and Monday night, when this decision is made. I may look at some of the stuff that comes in, just to see what it says.
But not charge us.
We are not gonna
Right.
take any action.
So why don't we, I mean, I think we should take action tonight, that if they don't agree, the application's withdrawn. There's no reason for us to all come back here Monday night if that happens. But we need to do it with understanding that tomorrow, the First Selectman's office is going to schedule a special meeting for Monday night at 7 o'clock for the purposes of discussing whether or not the town wants to proceed with the application on Wednesday if the state does agree to our
That's fine.
terms.
Yeah,
Okay.
so you
That's
could
good.
say that the application will be withdrawn unless two conditions are met. One is that the state comes back with a change in its position, and two, that this board approves proceeding under those new conditions.
What he said. And
So I'd like to make a motion of what he said.
Second.
So Jeff,
get that?
will you,
We did
will
not
you,
get that?
will you give for the record that
That's
motion?
Jeff, could you say that slowly and pronunciate?
I told my wife this would be a short meeting. Okay? I just figured like this
Happy
is.
birthday, Barbara.
Happy birthday, Barbara.
You should have brought cake.
The motion would be for the board to approve withdrawing the application submitted to the DPH for the new or expanded service, unless two conditions are met. One is that by the close of business on Monday, the state of Connecticut comes back with a material change in its position with regard to its support. And the second condition, that this board then approves proceeding with those new conditions.
Or proceeding with.
Making a
they can
decision.
make
Right,
both
not
conditions
approve, we
too.
don't
It could
approve
be
it, that we will.
Proceeding with the,
With the hearing.
proceeding with the hearing and not withdrawing the application with those new conditions.
Is that the motion by,
Counselor, is that okay?
Sure.
Counselor?
by who-
I'd
I'm sorry.
move Jeff Tinley's motion.
Jason
I'll second.
has made the motion?
And I'll second
Mike
that.
has seconded it.
What was that substance again? The first one
Well,
was,
let me say, it. Any discussion on the motion? There you go.
the first one was if they come back with material changes.
Yes. And the second is that this board approves proceeding to the hearing and not withdrawing the application based upon those new conditions.
So we would have to pass another resolution to withdrawing our withdrawal, so essentially.
Right. It would be withdrawn
Well, no, the
unless
condition
you
wouldn't have been met.
affirmatively say it should not be withdrawn.
Right.
So if the state tomorrow signs the MOU, then we're meeting Monday night to determine whether we
Right.
want to proceed.
Otherwise,
If
it's
the state-
withdrawn.
if by
Thank you
five-
so much.
There would be another resolution approving our continuing through the process.
If by 5 o'clock on Monday, nobody hears from the state, or if the state calls us and says no deal,
Our app's out.
Then we'll
That's
meet,
out.
we're all
Meeting's
meeting at the Rathskeller and that.
Well, we haven't voted yet.
yeah, we could still like.
So that's the motion on the floor. Any other discussion on that? I'll call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? And it carries.
Second that motion?
Made and second. Any discussion on that? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It carries. Thank you.
Yeah, I can do that.
What you want to do is you, do you want?
This is fine. The motion was to